everybody can see it. If their trees in their yard is not doing good, just look for those things. It's called pirates or something. I forgot it, but when you see it, you just remove it. Otherwise, from that onward, the branch will die. I have on most of the branch still. I have those. So I was checking out that when we cut it, all this went, or still we have some. And I found there are 3, 4, or maybe 5. I don't know. Still there. So I'm gonna take a picture. That will benefit all of you. So we will continue on Volume 2, Srila Prabhupada Lilamarta. The chapter is on the Bowery. Srila Prabhupada's new home, the Bowery, had a long history. In the early 1600s, when Manhattan was known as New Amsterdam and was controlled by the Dutch West India Company, Peter Minuit, the governor of New Netherlands, staked out a north-south road that was called the Bowery, because a number of Boweries or farms lay on either side. It was a dusty country road lined with quaint Dutch cottages and bordered by the peach orchards growing in the estate of Peter Stuyvesant. It became part of the high road to Boston and was of strategic importance during the American Revolutions as the only land entrance to New York City. Haribol. In the early 1800s, the Bowery was predominated by German immigrants. Later in the century, it became predominantly Jewish, and gradually it became the city center of theatrical life. However, as the history of Lower Manhattan described, quote, after 1870, there came the period of Bowery's celebrated degeneration. Fake auction rooms, salons specializing in 5-cent whiskey and knockout drops, sanctional dime museums, filthy and rat-ridden steel beer dives, together with Charles M. Hoyt's song, quote, the Bowery, I will never go there anymore. Fix it forever in the nation consciousness as a place of unspeakable corruption. Harigo. The reaction of Prabhupada's electrician friend was not unusual. The Bowery is still known all over the world as Skid Row, a place of ruin and homeless alcoholics. Perhaps the uptown electrician had done business in the Bowery and had seen the derelicts sitting around passing a bottle or lying unconsciousness in the gutter or staggering up to passerby and drunkenly bumping into them to ask for money. Most of the Bowery's 7,000 or 8,000 homeless men slept in lodging houses that required them to vacate their rooms during the day. Having nowhere else to go and nothing else to do, they would loiter on the street, standing silently on the sidewalks, leaning against a wall, or shuffling slowly along, alone or in groups. In cold weather, they would wear 2 coats and several suits of clothes at once, and would sometimes warm themselves around a fire they would keep going in a city garbage can. At night, those without lodging slept on the sidewalks, doorsteps, and street corners, crawl into discarded boxes, or sprawl side by side next to the bars. Thefts were commonplace. A man's pocket might be searched 10 or 20 times while he slept. The rate of hospitalization and death in the Bowery were 5 times higher than the national average. And many of the homeless men bore marks of recent injuries or violence. Prabhupada's loft 94 Bowery was 6 blocks south of Houston Street, Haribol. At Houston and Bowery, derelicts converge in the heavy crosstown traffic. When cars stopped for the light, bums would come up and wash the windshield and ask for money. South of Houston, the first block held mostly restaurant supply stores, lamp store, thermals, and luncheonettes. The buildings were of 3 and 4 stories, old, narrow, crowded tenements. Their faces covered with heavy fire escapes. Traffic on the Bowery ran uptown and downtown. Car park on the both sides of the street, and the constant traffic passed tightly. During the business day, working people passed briskly among the slow-moving derelicts. Many of the store windows were covered with protective iron gates, but behind the gates, the store owners lit their varieties of lamps to attract prospective wholesale and retail customers. 94 Bowery was just 2 doors north of Hester Street. The corner was occupied by the spacious Half Moon Tavern, which was frequented mostly by neighborhood alcoholics. Above the tavern sat a 4-story Bowery flop house marked by a neon sign, Palma House, which was covered by a protective metal cage and hung from the second floor on large chains. The hotel's entrance at 92 Bowery, which had no lobby but only a desolate hallway covered with dirty white towels, was no more than 6 feet from the entrance to 94. 94 Bowery was a narrow 4-story building. It had long ago been painted gray and bore the usual facing of a massive black fire escape. A well-worn black double door, its glass panel reinforced with the chicken wires, open onto the street. The sign above the door read AIR 3rd and 4th, indicating that artisan in residence occupied those floors. Haribo. The first floor of the next building north, 96 Bowery, was used for storage, and its front entrance was covered with a rusty iron gate. At 98 Bowery was another tavern, Harold's, smaller and dingier than the Half Moon. Thus the block consisted of 2 saloons, a flop house, and 2 buildings with lofts. In the 1960s, the loft living was just beginning in that area of New York City. The city had given permission for painters, musicians, sculptors, and other artists who require more space than available in most apartments to live in the building that had been constructed as factories in the 19th century. After these abandoned factories had been fitted with fireproof doors, bathtubs, shower stall, and heating, An artist could inexpensively use a large space. These were AIR lofts. Harvey Cohen's loft on the top floor of 94 Bowery was an open space almost 100 feet long from east to west and 25 feet wide. It received a good amount of sunlight on the east, the Bowery side, and it also had window at the west end as well as a skylight. The exposed rafter of the ceiling were 12 feet above the floor. High ceiling. Haribo. Harvey Cohen had used the loft as an art studio, and racks for painting still lined the walls. A kitchen and a shower were partitioned off in the northwest corner, and a room divider stood about 15 feet from the Bowery side windows. This divider did not run from the wall to wall, but was open at both ends, and it was several feet short of the ceilings. It was behind this partition that Prabhupada had his personal living area. A bed and a few chairs stood near the window, and Prabhupada's typewriter sat on his metal trunk next to the small table that held his stacks of Bhagavatam manuscripts. His dhotis hung drying on a clotheslines. On the other side of the partition was a dais about 10 feet wide and 5 feet deep, on which Prabhupada sat during his kirtan and lectures. The dais faced west toward the loft's large open space. Open, that is, except for a couple of rugs and an old-fashioned solid wood table lamp. On an easel, Harvey's painting of Lord Chaitanya dancing with his associates. The loft was a 4-flight walk-up and the only entrance, usually heavily bolted, was a door in the rear at the west end. From the outside, this door opened into a hallway, lit only by red exit light over the door. The hallway led to the right a few steps and into the open area. If a guest entered during a kirtan or a lecture, he would see the Swami about 30 feet from the entrance, seated on his dais. On other evening, the whole loft would be dark, but for the glow of the red exit light in the light hallway and a soft illumination radiating from the other side of the partition where Prabhupada was working. Prabhupada lived on the Bowery, sitting under a small light, while hundreds of derelicts also sat under hundreds of naked lights on the same city block. He had no more fixed income than the derelicts, nor any greater security of a fixed residence. Yet his consciousness was different. He was translating Srimad Bhagavatam into English, speaking to the world through his Bhaktivedanta purport. His duty, whether on the 14th floor of a Riverside Drive apartment building or in a corner of a Bowery loft, was to establish Krishna consciousness as the prime necessity for all humanity. He went on with his translating and with his constant vision of a Krishna temple in New York City. Because his consciousness was absorbed in Krishna's universal mission, he did not depend on his surrounding for shelter. Home for him was not a matter of bricks and wood, but of taking shelter of Krishna in every circumstances. Haribol. As Prabhupada had said to his friends uptown, quote, everywhere is my home, unquote. Whereas without Krishna's shelter, the whole world would be a desolate place. Often he would refer to a scriptural statement that people live in three different modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. Life in the forest is in the mode of goodness. Life in the city is in passion, and the life in a degraded place like a liquor shop, a brothel, or the Bowery is in the mode of ignorance. But to live in a temple of Vishnu is to live in spiritual world, Vaikuntha, which is transcendental to all three material modes. And this Bowery loft, where Prabhupada was holding his meetings and performing kirtan, was also transcendental. When he was behind the partition, working in his corner before the open pages of Srimad Bhagavatam, that room was as good as his room back at the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan. News of the Swami's move to the Bowery loft spread, mostly by word of mouth at the Paradox restaurant, and people began to come by in the evening to chant with him. The musical kirtans were especially popular on the Bowery, since the Swami's new congregation consisted mostly of local musicians and artists, who responded more to the transcendental music than to the philosophy. Every morning, he would hold a class on Srimad Bhagavatam, attended by David Allen, Robert Nelson, and an other boy. And occasionally, he would teach cooking to whoever was interested. He was usually available for personal talk with any inquiring visitor or with his new roommate. Although Prabhupada and David each had a designated living area in the large lot, the entire place soon became dominated by Prabhupada's preaching activities. Prabhupada and David got on well together, and at first Prabhupada considered David as an aspiring disciple. April 27. He wrote to his friends in India, described his relationship with David Allen. He was attending my class at 72nd Street along with others. And when I experienced this theft case in my room, he invited me to his residence. So I'm with him and training him. He has good prospect because already he has given up all bad habits. In this country, illicit connection with women, smoking, drinking, and eating of meats are common affairs. Besides that, there are other bad habits like using only toilet paper and not bathing after evacuating, etc. But by my request, he has given up nicely 90% of his old habits, and he is chanting Mahamantra regularly. So I'm giving him the chance, and I think he is improving. Tomorrow, I have arranged for some prasadam distribution, and he has gone to purchase some things from the market. When David first came to the Bowery, he appeared like a clean-cut college student. He was 21, 6 feet tall, blue-eyed, handsome, and intelligent-looking. Most of his new friends in New York were older and considered him a kid. David's family lived in East Lansing, Michigan, and his mother was paying $100 monthly to sublease the loft. Although he did not have much experience, he had read that a new realm of mind expansion was available through psychedelic drugs, and he was heading fast into the hazardous world of LSD. His meeting with the Swami came at a time of radical change and profoundly affected his life. So David is describing in his own word, it was a really good relationship I had with the Swami, but I was overwhelmed by the tremendous energy of being that close to him. It spurred my consciousness very fast. Even my dreams at night would be so vivid of Krishna consciousness. I was often sleeping when the Swami was up, because he was up late in the night working on his translations. That possibly where a lot of the consciousness and dreams just flowed in because of that deep relationship. It also has to do with studying Sanskrit. There was a lot of immediate impact with the language. The language seems to have such a strong mystical quality, the way he translated it word for word. Prabhupada's old friend from uptown, Robert Nelson, continued to visit him on the Babri. He was impressed by Prabhupada's friendly relationship with David, who he saw was learning many things from the Swami. Mr. Robert brought a small American-made hand organ similar to an Indian harmonium and donated to David for chanting with Prabhupada. At 7 in the morning, Mr. Robert would come by, and after Bhagavatam class, he would talk informally with Prabhupada, telling his ideas for making records and selling books. He wanted to continue helping the Swami. They would sit in a chairs near the front window, and Mr. Robert would listen while Prabhupada talked for hours about Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. New people began coming to see Prabhupada on the Babri. Carl Jurgens, a 30-year-old black man from the Bronx, had attended Cornell University and was now independently studying Indian religion and Jain Buddhism. He had experience with drugs as psychedelic tools, and he had an interest in the music and poetry of India. He was influential among his friends and tried to interest them in meditation. He had even been dabbling in Sanskrit. Shokal Jurgens explained in his own words, I had just finished reading a book called The Wonder That Was India. I had gotten the definition of a sannyasi and a brahmachari and so forth. There was a vivid description in that particular book of how you could see a sannyasi coming down the road with his saffron robe. It must have made more than just a superficial impression on me, because it came to me this one chill evening. I was going to visit Michael Grant, Mukund Maharaj, that I know, probably going to smoke some marijuana and sit around, maybe play some music. And I was coming down Hester Street. If you make a left on Bowery, you go up to the Mike place on Grand Street. But it's funny that I choose to go that way because the shorter way would have been to go down Grand Street. But if I had gone that way, I would probably have missed Swamiji. So I decided to go down Hester and then make a left. All of a sudden I saw in this dingy alcove a brilliant saffron robe. As I passed, I saw it was Swamiji knocking on the door, trying to gain entrance. There was two bumps hunched up against the door. It was like a two-part door. One of them was sealed and the other was locked. The two bumps were lying on the either side of Swamiji. One of these men had actually expired, which often happened, and you had to call the police or health department to get them reborn. I don't think I saw the man lying in the doorway until I walked up to Swamiji and asked him, "Are you a sannyasi?" And he answered, "Yes." We started this conversation about how he was starting a temple. And he mentioned Lord Chaitanya and the whole thing. He just came out with his flow of strange things to me, right there in the street. But I knew what he was talking about. Somehow I had the familiarity of having just read this book and dwell into Indian religion. So I knew that this was a momentous occasion for me, and I wanted to help him. I banged on the door, and eventually we got into the loft. He invited me to come to a kirtan, and I came back later that night for my first kirtan. From that point on, it was fairly a regular thing. 3 times a week. At one point, Swamiji asked me to stay with him, and I stayed for about 2 weeks. There you go. It was perhaps because of Carl's interest in Sanskrit that Prabhupada began holding Sanskrit classes. Carl and David and a few others would spend hours learning Sanskrit under Prabhupada's guidance. Using a chalkboard he found in the loft, Prabhupada taught the alphabet, and his students wrote their exercise in notebooks. Prabhupada would look over that shoulder to see if they were writing correctly and would review their pronunciation. His students were learning not simply Sanskrit, but the instructions of Bhagavad Gita. Each day, he would give them a verse to copy in the Sanskrit alphabet, Devanagari, transliterate into the Roman alphabet, and then translate word for word into English. But their interest in Sanskrit waned, and Prabhupada gradually gave up the daily classes to spend time working on his own translation of Srimad Bhagavatam. 6:53. 2 more minutes. Okay. His new friends may have regarded these lessons as Sanskrit classes, but actually they were bhakti classes. He had not come to America as the ambassador of Sanskrit. His Guru Maharaj has ordered him to teach Krishna consciousness. But since he had found in Carl and some of his friends a desire to investigate Sanskrit, he encouraged it. As a youth, Lord Chaitanya had also started a Sanskrit school with the real purpose of teaching love of Krishna. He would teach in such a way that every word meant Krishna. And when his student objected, he closed the school. Similarly, when Prabhupada found that his students' interest in Sanskrit was transitory, and since he himself had no mission on behalf of Sanskrit linguistics, he gave it up. Haribol. I think we should stop here before the devotees leave. We would like to offer them the humble obeisances at the dusk of their feet, begging their mercy so we can remain steadfast in our practice, not deviating a moment, and that's the only way we'll be able to attract Krishna's attention in our life.